Welcome everyone, Christine here with the discussion about the best vassal races in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now this is recorded in the current live version of the game. We do have a major patch coming out in a couple of days with the Chaos Dwarves, though I don't personally expect that the Chaos Dwarf patch will change anything with regards to this list. There's going to be plenty of changes coming in other respects with regards to the game, but not in this particular area. At least that's what I personally think. How the Chaos Dwarves do it fair as a vassal, that's probably a different discussion for a different time. But anyway, when you're talking about vassals, you're interested in two things. You're no longer interested in the diplomatic situation, so their aversion, their hostility towards other races or other races towards them is not really important with vassals. Where you're interested in two things: military prowess and, quite very importantly, money. So you would ideally want a vassal that's really powerful from a military perspective and can generate a lot of money as well, especially if you give them a lot of territory for them to use, because obviously they're going to fill your coffers. And in this respect, we have at number 5, Bretonnia. From a military perspective, Bretonnia is certainly a very limited faction, though they can aid you with early game artillery, because they can get field trebuchets at tier 2. And keep in mind, you're not just thinking about chaos that can vassalize, you also have the vampire faction. So the Tomb Kings can vassalize, the vampire counts can vassalize, and it can give you a huge military advantage, because otherwise, like if you're playing the Tomb Kings, for instance, the number of artillery pieces that you can get is, of course, limited by the unit caps. Well, being able to get tier 2 artillery from Bretonnia, assuming they build the structures, which is always a big if, I would argue, but assuming you do get artillery support from Bretonnia, can be very useful, because these field trebuchets are really good at knocking down walls, and they're available early on. This is especially useful if you're playing the vampire counts in particular, because obviously they lack that ability, so they can be funneled into the choke points in enemy settlement. So that is pretty useful to have from a military perspective from Bretonnia, but not much else when we're talking about that. I mean, yes, you could obviously use allied recruitment and get yourself some really powerful cavalry, but their military value is limited. However, their economic value is a completely different matter. Now, it is tricky when we're talking about the economic value, because Bretonnia does have a lot of economic potential, but unfortunately the AI just builds a lot of bad structures, and it never deletes structures as well, so obviously there's some limitations with that. So ideally you'd be giving a Bretonnian vassal a bunch of settlements with no structures in them, and just hoping that they're going to build the farms and as well the windmills. Because if they do, then that's 600 base income for the landed estate, but that goes all the way to 900 with the water wheel. So 900 income from an economic structure that has no other downsides than the fact that they need the water wheel to get it working is a very substantial economic benefit. And Bretonnia in general generates a lot of money. On top of that, they also have really good growth, so that means they can get access to this economy earlier than other factions. Like their base growth is 60 at from any tier 3 settlement. It gets to pretty ridiculous levels when we're thinking about provincial capitals. Like Bretonnia flat out has one of the best growths in the game, and keep in mind the AI gets major growth benefits as well. So Bretonnia as a vassal can be genuinely a powerhouse. Not necessarily so useful as a military ally, I'd argue. Their military value is limited, but as a vassal, when it comes to generating income for you, very substantial with regards to that. Very, very substantial that what Bretonnia is going to give you in terms of filling your coffers if you do decide to vassalize them. Now, at number 4, we have the Dwarves. The Dwarves have a great deal of military value as allies, and that kind of value is going to be carried over for them as vassals. Forik, in particular, is a very substantial military power, because his army is just almost nigh on unstoppable on the campaign map. Like, if you've ever faced Forik's army in battle, you know what I'm talking about. Very powerful because of the runes. And the dwarf armies in general are extremely powerful because they have units with high leadership, high armor. So in terms of auto-resolve situations, they'll just do brilliantly well, let alone how they'll do in an actual battle. Now, here's the thing about the dwarves. They're very useful from that perspective, but it's harder to vassalize them than other races on this list. The kind of options available there are not they're not quite as available for vassalization. Though you can do it as the vampiric factions for diplomatic vassalization, as well as some other factions as well. But mainly, really, if you're thinking about Tomb Kings, Vampire Counts, they can vassalize. I'm a bit tricky to do so, but if you do manage a vassalization agreement with the Dwarf, you can just put the Dwarf Legendary Lord, or even a minor faction, to just hold an entire flank of your territory, and you don't have to care about it. In fact, they might just even conquer a substantial portion of the enemy territory on their own. The reason the Dwarves make such great allies is because on high difficulties, like if you're playing on Legendary very hard, well, the higher difficulty benefits that the AI gets make up for a lot of their shortcomings. Oh, Dwarves have poor growth. Never mind. High difficulties give them great growth. Gives them good public order, so even better growth. Gives them a lot of economic benefits, be it background income, better and much better upkeep. So they'll have more powerful armies, and they'll have more plentiful armies. Just don't necessarily expect the Dwarves to generate the biggest income in the world. I mean, they can generate a fair amount of income, but their income is not necessarily going to be all that great. I mean, if you want to generate a fair amount of income with Dwarves, you basically need to get these free structures in your settlement. And the problem with that, of course, is the AI has a really bad build order. But if you could get a lot of these structures, be it the trading depot, especially in a provincial capital, for the trade resource income from old buildings, as well as toolmaker workshops, then the Dwarves can add a lot of value as a vassal from an economic perspective. But again, it is going to be limited by the bad build order of the AI. And to be fair, the Dwarven economy is not the best in the game. It's not one of the best in the game, far from it. In fact, it's one of the bigger issues. Like, Dwarves have powerful armies. They have a limited economy, however, that requires a lot of effort to get going. And on top of that, they have poor growth and poor casualty replenishment. Higher difficulties can only make up for so much with that. But you can expect more military value from the Dwarves than you're looking at economic value if you do decide to vassalize them. Especially, like with Bretonnia, you get tier 2 artillery and the grudge throwers, again, a very substantial artillery option. Or cannons at tier 3, very, very useful. Or iron drakes, which are flamethrowers and absolutely insane in a battle. At number 3, we have the Dark Elves, especially Morathi and Hellebron, but any Dark Elf Legendary Lord will do very well as a vassal. In terms of one of the main benefits a vassal gives you, economy. Now, don't get me wrong, the Dark Elves do have powerful armies between their tier 1 Dread Spears being effective, shield wall units, their Dark Shards at tier 1 as well, or Dark Shards with shields at tier 2, and then Blackheart Corsairs. They do have a lot of hero capacity for their structures, they do have powerful units, but again, it's not the military value that you're going to get from the Dark Elves. It's the economic benefit that far, far surpasses them. See, the thing about the Dark Elves is their economy is balanced around slaves, right? So you need to maintain a constant flow of slaves in order to maintain a huge amount of economy. But their base economic building with slaves generates 300 income. At tier 2, it goes to 500. And at tier 3, we're looking at 700. Now, it's not Bretonian levels of income, sure, but Bretonnia, remember, does need those multiple structures, and if you're expecting the AI to build those multiple structures, be prepared to be disappointed with respect to that. Whereas the Dark Elves, if they get a bunch of guild holes, you'll be raking in the cash. How much cash? Well, I'll just give you an example. When I was playing Valkia over here in the north, right, and I vassalized Nagron, Grond, and Hellebron, Grond and Hellebron in particular were generating like 4k income for me as vassals. That was how much money they were generating. And basically, Grond just had their initial province over here, 4 regions, sure, so it's very substantial in a gold mine. Hellebron had her initial province, and I believe I gave her some territory over here. So basically a province, so basically 6 regions, and well over 4k income from both of these. And that's from Grond, which is a minor faction. Of course, they benefit greatly from that gold mine. Malekith, funnily enough, was actually generating the least amount of income as a vassal, so he was the most limited. Now, that huge income means more armies, means more combat power on the campaign for them, let alone, you know, what it is to have a vassal as Valkia within, like, let's say, the first 20 turns of your campaigns, having 3 vassals, 2 of which are generating over 8k income, even closer to 9k or even 10k income, and then you get Malekith, who was generating like 2k. That is a ridiculous, absurd level of money you can get in your campaign. This really benefits Valkia and to a lesser extent Sigvald, because Sigvald can vassalize these factions on his own. He just has a harder path to do so. The more territory you get, the more income they get, the more economic buildings they get, the more money they're just going to generate. It gets to a fairly ridiculous level with these Dark Elven factions. They just end up generating a ridiculous amount of money. And it's one of the things that really benefits them in their campaigns. Like, if you've ever fought the Dark Elf Legendary Lords in Nagron, like Hellbrand in particular, you know how many stacks you can produce is quite absurd on Legendary, and you're going to benefit from that as if you vassalize these factions. I mean, if you vassalize these factions, you can declare war on the world, and they can take a vast swath of territory. You help them, they become even more powerful. The Dark Elves are very aggressive expansionists, so they benefit from that kind of aggression, and I believe that they don't suffer from any kind of limitations on slaves. They'll always have slaves to generate income for them. Now, at number 2, we have the Greenskins, especially Grimgor Ironhide, but any Greenskin Legendary Lord will make for a very good vassal. Grimgor is at the top of that particular list, simply because he generally can build a vast empire on his own. He's the only Greenskin Legendary Lord that does it. Azag, Warzag, Grom do struggle in their campaigns in a significant way. Not Grimgor! No, not Grimgor! Don't be surprised if he ends up dominating the entire northern part of the Mountains of Morn, if not the entirety of the Mountains of Morn and the Darklands. And some people might think, oh, the Chaos Dwarves are going to stop him. It's like, no, they aren't going to stop him. Believe me, they can't stop him. It is a brutal slog dealing with Grimgor as any faction in the game. But if you can vassalize Grimgor or a Greenskin Legendary Lord, you get the military powerhouse. Typically speaking, the Greenskins are very useful as military allies from the military perspective. The problem is diplomacy, right? A lot of factions hate them. They hate a lot of factions, so they'll drag them in a bunch of pointless wars that you don't want. But if you vassalize them, you get a lot of that military power, the vast majority of that military power, and you don't have to deal with the problems of diplomacy. So they are extraordinary as vassals. Grimgor over here, let me just say it like this. If you're playing as Kolic, you can currently vassalize Grimgor pretty fast. It is a brutal battle over here next to Saber Mountain. You basically rush to Saber Mountain and vassalize them. But once you vassalize him, you just declare war on the world and he wins against the world. See, the thing about dealing with the Greenskins is that the Greenskins are all about momentum. If you let them get going, if you give them a bunch of territory, they won't stop easily. The way you defeat the Greenskins is for attrition. So Warzak generally loses because Malagor and maybe Scarbrand or Queek, or both, declare war on him and take his undefended territories over here while he's busy trying to break through the Dwarven defenses. Grom just loses because he's at war with everyone around him. Azag loses because he has to fight Draika and the Dwarves as well. Skarsnik, the less said about him, the better when we're talking about him. But Grimgor, he has no major opponents that are within easy reach of him. And as stated, if you're thinking Chaos Dwarves are going to change that calculation, let me just assure you they will not. They will absolutely not. So Grimgor is a powerhouse of a military power. All the Greenskin Legendary Lords can be powerhouses if they get enough territory. Because the thing is, the Greenskins have very cheap but incredibly powerful effective armies. And they get the WA mechanic, which adds another army to their main army, so they become absolutely ridiculous on the campaign map and on the battlefield. And they can conquer a vast array of territory on their own. And the thing about vassalizing them, when you vassalize factions, like, say, Warriors of Chaos, if you're vassalizing a faction and you start getting quite a few vassals, no one's going to try and mess with you in that particular situation. Now, of course, for Kolic, he would probably want to have a lot of smaller vassals, but it is a genuine benefit in your campaign if you're playing as Kolic to just give Grimgor a great deal of territory and watch him go to town and basically purge every enemy that you might face on the campaign map. Immense amount of military power, and not so easily dealt with once they do take a huge amount of territory, because in order to defeat the Greenskins, if you're playing against them, in order to defeat them, you basically need to commit to a full-blown offensive, a relentless offensive against them to take their territory as quickly as possible. Because if you take it slow, that's the mistake some people might make. If you take it slow, and certainly the mistake the AI makes, well, if you're not being aggressive, then what will happen is, oh, you defeated an army, great, in a couple of turns, because they have a huge amount of recruitment benefits from all their structures. And obviously the AI gets more recruitment slots as well. In a couple of turns, they'll just throw another stack against you and another stack. You require relentless aggression to deal with them. You need to put them on the defensive, and that's how you beat them. But the AI is bad at doing that against greenskin factions. Like, the AI can win if there's multiple factions attacking them. Sure, that's what happens in every other greenskin campaign. But Grimgor, given his starting position and the territory he has and the factions around him, he is very safe. So if you've managed to vassalize him, which is no easy feat, to be very clear, but if you manage to vassalize him, or you could, if you vassalize the other greenskin legendary lords, you get an immense amount of military power in your campaign. Not the greatest economy, though their economy can generate a decent amount of money, but it's not the economic value that you're getting from the greenskins. It's the military value. Their economy can only go up to 500, which certainly isn't the best when we're talking about factions, or rather races, on this list. But military value, almost unsurpassed in the rest of the game. Now, at number 1, at least based on what people voted in regards to placement, we have the High Elves. I don't necessarily think I would agree with this particular decision, because the Dark Elves just have a lot better economic output, though the High Elves do have their own advantages. Their armies can be very cheap and very effective, whereas the Dark Elves can have very effective armies, but they're going to pay a huge amount of cash for them. So having cheap and effective armies like the High Elves is a significant boon. On top of that, there is another benefit. There are free legendary lords in Ulthuan. Now, conquering Ulthuan is something of a nightmare to do, but if you do manage it as an Akari or some other faction and you vassalize Alariel, Elfarian, and Tyrion, well, you've just won the game. Because while none of these are going to be as substantial as, say, Grimgor, all 3 of them working together against a common foe is a huge amount of ability on the campaign map in a way that not even Grimgor can match. Because each of these guys, because of the economic benefits the AI gets on higher difficulties, is going to be able to maintain at least 2 full stacks, of course, provided you give them territory. If you give them a good amount of territory, they're going to generate a lot more armies. Like, you're looking at 3, 4 stacks, each of them, that they're going to throw against the enemy, and they will be pretty damn great at conquering territory on their own and pretty good at defending it. The High Elves are also the kind of faction that may not start as strong early on, like the Greenskins, the Dark Elves, even the Dwarves, but the more you play the campaign, the stronger they get. They get a better income, especially if they maintain a high level of control. Their 2 buildings working together can generate them a good amount of income, though I would argue the Dark Elves can generate more money than them. But the High Elves certainly are a race that has the advantage of just growing more and more and more powerful the longer you play the campaign. So for a long campaign, when you're looking to take over the world, you can really benefit from having a lot of High Elven vassals. And the thing is, they'll work very well together. Like, you have 3 legendary lords in Ulthuan here, very close together. Split Ulthuan between the 3 of them and watch them become some of the most powerful factions on the entire campaign map. Is that absurd? You actually have a 4th over here with Alifanar pretty close by. This is more substantial than just Malekith and Hellebrand, and of course Marathi down south over here, because by being so close to each other, like, this territory is unassailable. Like, Ulthuan is very, very difficult for the AI to take in the first place. The only times I've seen it in a campaign, and even then I've never seen Ulthuan completely taken over in any campaign I've played. Sometimes it got close, but it was only worse it was contested, but the vast majority of times, like, Tyrion, Alariel, and Elfarian took control of it, and it's only in situations where Noctilus and Akari have a really good campaign that they manage to put them on the back foot, but it doesn't necessarily last either. Or rather, the wild card is if Morathi gets involved in the war in Ulthuan, she's basically the deciding factor. Like, if Morathi gets involved early on in the campaign, she can tip the balance in Noctilus's and Nakari's favor, really put the High Elves on the back foot, but usually that doesn't happen all that often from what I've seen. It did used to happen quite often in Warhammer 2, not so much in Warhammer 3. So you have 3 legendary lords in a really powerful campaign position that is unassailable by your enemies. They have great provinces. Some of those you might want to take for yourself, depending on the faction you're playing, of course. But you have just 3 ridiculous legendary lords, and then, of course, Alifanar. So you could even consider 4 legendary lords that are within striking distance of each other, and each of them is a powerhouse in their own right. 4 of them as your vassals is an absurd level of power on the campaign map that no other race can simply match. That's just the situation with the High Elves. That's their benefit. Like, individually, they might not be as strong as some other factions, as some other legendary lords you can vassalize, as some other races you can vassalize, but together, working together, which the High Elves excel at. They excel at diplomacy, they excel at getting those trade agreements. Working together with their armies combined, they are nigh on unstoppable, because even if one of them suffers a setback, doesn't matter. 3 more are ready to go in to the meat grinder, and just, you can't defeat a dozen stacks. No AI faction in the game can stand up to a dozen stacks showing up on their territory. So once you've set up a really good situation early on as an Akari, you can just AFK and win and watch your the vassals take over the world for you. Declare war on the world and watch them win that particular war. It is absurd. It is ridiculous. It is insanely powerful. So it's not the individual strength of a particular legendary lord. It's not just one faction. It's multiple factions and how well they work together. Because getting these kind of legendary lords all close together, all of them being powerful in their own right, getting them working together far more easily than you can do it with the Dark Elves, by the way. Because, like, vassalizing Marathi as either Sigvald or Valkia or even Nakari can be something of a nuisance, really. But vassalizing the High Elves is pretty damn ridiculous. Like, if you can show up in Ulthuan and conquer it, then you can conquer it. Like, that's the question. If you can do that, no problem. And generally speaking, the factions that can vassalize others do have substantial military ability to be able to achieve that. And that's it. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. I know the cast Dwarves are going to be coming out in a couple of days. Really excited to talk about them. There's quite a few things to mention with regards to them.